Long before Esau took his first breath, before he made his first choice, before he showed any sign of good or evil, God had already made a decision about him. This isn't a story that begins with birth. It begins in the mind of God himself, in a plan that was set before time existed. What we're about to discover will challenge everything we think we know about fairness, choice, and divine love. The story starts with Abraham's death and Isaac carrying the weight of an incredible promise. God had chosen Abraham's family line to bring the Messiah into the world. Now Isaac stood as the bridge between his father's faith and the future of God's people. But there was a problem. Isaac had no children. Isaac knew the promise had to continue through him. Every day without a son felt like the promise might die with him. The responsibility was enormous. God had promised that through Abraham's seed, all nations would be blessed. Now that promise rested on Isaac's shoulders. The weight of this calling pressed down on Isaac daily. He had seen how his father Abraham had waited decades for him to be born. Now Isaac faced the same test of faith. Would God keep his word? Would the promise that started with his grandfather really continue through him? Isaac understood that this wasn't just about having children. This was about God's plan to save the world. Somewhere in his family line, the Savior would be born. Every day that passed without a son felt like a threat to God's entire plan for humanity. The covenant made with Abraham wasn't just a family blessing, it was the foundation of God's plan to redeem mankind from sin. Isaac carried this weight on his heart every single day. The promise included specific details that made Isaac's situation even more pressing. God had promised Abraham that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. He had promised that through Abraham's seed, all the families of the earth would be blessed. This meant the Messiah himself would come through this family line. Without children, Isaac watched these amazing promises hanging by a thread. Isaac married Rebekah when she was young and beautiful. The marriage had been arranged by God himself through Abraham's servant. Rebekah was perfect, kind, generous, and devoted to the Lord. Everything seemed ready for God's plan to unfold. But years passed with no children. 1 year became 5, then 10, then 15. The couple watched as their hopes slowly turned to worry. How could God's promise come true if they had no children? 20 long years went by with an empty house and empty arms. During those 20 years, Isaac never stopped believing. He had learned from his father's example that God keeps his promises even when it seems impossible. Abraham had waited until he was 100 years old for Isaac to be born. Now Isaac had to show the same kind of faith. Rebekah suffered through those years too. In their culture, a woman without children was considered cursed. She watched other women have babies while her arms remained empty, but she supported Isaac's prayers and held on to hope that God would remember them. The waiting wasn't just difficult. It was a test of everything they believed about God. If God had really promised to bless all nations through Abraham's family, why was he allowing the family line to die out? This was their dark night of the soul, their test of faith. Every month that passed without conception felt like another small death of their hopes. Every time they saw other families with children, the pain grew deeper. Isaac remembered his father's stories about waiting for God's promises. Abraham had waited 25 years for Isaac to be born. Sarah had been 90 years old when Isaac was conceived. If God could work miracles for his parents, surely he could work miracles for them too. But as the years dragged on, Isaac began to understand just how hard it was to keep trusting when everything seemed hopeless. But Isaac kept praying. He interceded before God's throne with the same passion his father had shown. He reminded God of the promises made to Abraham. He pleaded for mercy and begged for a child to carry on the covenant. As Genesis chapter 25 verse 21 tells us, Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Isaac's prayers weren't casual requests. They were desperate pleas from a man who understood what was at stake. He prayed with tears, with fasting, with complete dependence on God's mercy. He knew that without God's intervention, the covenant would die with him. His prayers showed his deep faith that God was able to do impossible things. God finally answered. After 2 decades of waiting, Rebekah was pregnant. The couple celebrated, thinking their trials were over. They had no idea that their real test was just beginning. Rebekah's pregnancy was unlike any other. From the very beginning, something was terribly wrong. The babies inside her fought so violently that she feared for her life. As Genesis chapter 25, verse 22 describes, the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If it is thus, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The pain was unbearable. Rebekah couldn't understand what was happening. This should have been the happiest time of her life, but instead she was in constant agony. The babies kicked and fought inside her womb with such force that she thought she might die. This wasn't normal pregnancy discomfort. This was warfare happening inside her body. The violence was so intense that Rebekah began to wonder if it would have been better never to have conceived at all. She was desperate for answers. The fighting never stopped. Day and night, the babies battled each other inside her womb. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, couldn't find any position that brought relief. Rebekah had waited 20 years for this pregnancy, but now she was beginning to wish it had never happened. The pain was so severe that she cried out to God, asking why she was even alive if this was what she had to endure. She had expected pregnancy to be a blessing, but this felt like a curse. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She went to ask God directly what was wrong. This took courage. Women didn't usually approach God directly in those days. But Rebekah was desperate. She needed to know why her miracle pregnancy had become a nightmare. She needed to understand what was happening inside her body. What God told her changed everything. In Genesis chapter 25, verse 23, the Lord said to her, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The older shall serve the younger." This was shocking news. God wasn't just talking about 2 babies. He was talking about 2 entire nations that would come from her sons. The fighting in her womb was a picture of the conflict that would last for thousands of years between their descendants. The violence she was experiencing wasn't just about her pregnancy. It was about the future of 2 peoples who would never be at peace with each other. Even more surprising, God said the older son would serve the younger. This went against everything they knew about family order and tradition. In their world, the firstborn son inherited everything and ruled over his younger brothers. But God was turning this system upside down. The prophecy revealed that God had his own plans that didn't follow human customs. He would choose the younger son to carry on his covenant, not the older one. This was the first hint that God's ways are not man's ways. The revelation explained why the babies were fighting so violently in her womb. They weren't just brothers, they were the fathers of 2 nations that would be enemies. The conflict that Rebekah felt in her body was a preview of the hatred that would exist between their descendants for generations to come. But there was something even more shocking that wouldn't be revealed until much later. In the New Testament book of Romans, chapter 9, verses 11 through 13, the Apostle Paul explains something that makes many people uncomfortable. He writes about Jacob and Esau. Though they were not yet born and had done nothing either good or bad, in order that God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works but because of him who calls, she was told, "The older will serve the younger." As it is written, "Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated." These words are hard to understand. God made his choice about these 2 boys before they were even born. Before Esau had a chance to do anything good or bad, God had already decided to hate him. This wasn't about what Esau would do. It was about God's own plan and purpose. The word hated here doesn't mean God was angry with Esau. It means God chose not to show him the same special love he gave to Jacob. Paul makes it clear that this choice had nothing to do with anything the boys would do in their lives. God didn't look into the future and see that Jacob would be good and Esau would be bad. He made his choice based on his own sovereign will, not on their future actions. This decision was made in eternity past, before time began, before the boys existed, before they had any opportunity to prove themselves worthy or unworthy. This truth reveals something important about God's character. He is completely free to choose whom he will bless and whom he will pass by. No one can question his decisions or demand an explanation. God owes no one his favor, and he has the right to give his love to whomever he chooses. This isn't unfair, it's mercy. If God gave everyone what they deserved, no one would be saved. The hatred God had for Esau was not unjust or cruel. It was simply the absence of the special choosing love that God gave to Jacob. God chose to save Jacob and to pass by Esau, and this choice was made in eternity past, before either boy existed. Esau was left in his natural state of rebellion against God, while Jacob was given grace to love and serve the Lord. This doctrine of predestination shows us that salvation comes entirely from God's grace, not from human choice or effort. Jacob didn't earn God's love by being better than Esau. God chose Jacob simply because it pleased him to do so. This truth humbles human pride and exalts God's sovereignty over all things. When the time came for Rebekah to give birth, everything happened exactly as God had predicted. The labor was difficult, matching the violent struggle that had gone on for months in her womb. But finally, the first baby emerged. The first baby came out red and hairy all over. They named him Esau, which means hairy. His appearance was striking. He looked more like a wild animal than a regular baby. His whole body was covered with red hair, making him look rough and primitive. Right behind him came his brother, and something amazing happened. As Genesis chapter 25 verse 26 tells us, afterward his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Jacob's name means he grabs the heel, or he takes the place of another. Even in the womb, Jacob was trying to get ahead of his older brother. This wasn't just a coincidence, it was a sign of what was coming. The sight of Jacob grabbing Esau's heel was a living picture of the prophecy God had given to Rebekah. The older would serve the younger, and here was proof that this reversal was already beginning. Jacob wouldn't wait to claim his place. He was reaching for it from the moment of birth. The younger brother was already trying to overtake the older. When, just as God had predicted, the two boys looked completely different from each other. Esau was red and covered in hair, looking like he belonged in the wild. Jacob was smooth and normal-looking. You could see just by looking at them that they were going to be very different people. Their physical appearances matched their spiritual destinies, one rough and earthly, the other smooth and chosen by God. Their names told the story of their future. Esau would also be called Edom, which means red, after the red land where his descendants would live. The name connected him to the earth, to physical things, to the world of hunting and violence that would define his life. Jacob's name pointed to his future as someone who would take his brother's place as the chosen one. The birth scene was a perfect picture of God's election. The one who came first was not the one God had chosen. The one who came second, grabbing at his brother's heel, was the one who would receive God's favor. Human order said Esau should be first, but God's order put Jacob first. From the very moment of birth, God's plan was already in motion. As the boys grew up in Isaac's house, they received the same teaching and care. They heard the same stories about God's promises to Abraham. They learned the same prayers and traditions. Everything about their upbringing was identical. Isaac told both boys about how God had called Abraham out of his homeland. He explained, how God had promised to make Abraham's descendants into a great nation. He taught them about the covenant, about the coming Messiah, about their special place in God's plan. Rebekah shared with both boys the story of how God had chosen Isaac over Ishmael. She told them about the promise that had been passed down through their family. She taught them to pray and to worship the one true God. Both boys received the same spiritual instruction, but even with the same parents, same home, and same teaching, the boys turned out completely different. This proved that God's choice wasn't based on their environment or education. It was based on something deeper, something God had decided before they were born. As they grew, their personalities began to show. Esau was drawn to physical things, the outdoors, hunting, immediate pleasures. He had no patience for sitting still or thinking about spiritual matters. The stories about God's promises seemed boring to him compared to the excitement of the hunt. Jacob, on the other hand, stayed close to home and seemed to understand that spiritual things mattered more than physical things. He listened carefully when Isaac told stories about God. He thought about the promises and what they meant for his future. The difference between the boys wasn't about their circumstances or opportunities. It was about the work of God in their hearts. Jacob had been given a heart that could respond to spiritual truth. Esau had been left in his natural state, caring only about earthly things. As the twin boys grew into young men under Isaac's roof, their completely different natures became impossible to ignore. Genesis chapter 25, verse 27 describes their development. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man, dwelling in tents. Esau threw himself into the wild life of hunting with passion that bordered on obsession. He loved the thrill of tracking animals through the wilderness, the excitement of the chase, and the satisfaction of the kill. His hands became rough from handling weapons and skinning animals. His skin grew dark from constant exposure to the sun. Everything about him spoke of violence and bloodshed. The hunt wasn't just Esau's hobby. It became his entire identity. He lived for the moments when he could grab his bow and arrows and disappear into the wild for days at a time. He felt more at home among wild animals than he did sitting in his father's tent, listening to stories about God's promises. The wilderness called to something deep in his nature, something that craved freedom from rules and responsibility. Esau developed a reputation as the most skilled hunter in the region. He could track any animal, no matter how clever or dangerous. He could survive in the wilderness for weeks with nothing but his weapons and his wits. Other men looked up to him for his physical strength and outdoor skills. But all of this praise only fed his pride and pulled him further away from spiritual things. Jacob chose a completely different path. While his brother roamed the wilderness, Jacob stayed close to home. He helped his mother with household tasks and listened carefully when his father told stories about their family's history with God. He preferred the quiet of the tent to the chaos of the hunt. He thought deeply about spiritual matters while his brother chased after physical pleasures. The difference between the brothers wasn't just about their interests. It was about what they valued in life. Esau lived for immediate satisfaction. If he wanted something, he had to have it right away. He couldn't think beyond the present moment to consider future consequences. Jacob, on the other hand, was willing to wait for better things. He understood that some things were worth more than temporary pleasures. This difference in their characters created a dangerous division in Isaac's household. Genesis chapter 25, verse 28 reveals the problem. Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Isaac made a terrible mistake by showing favoritism to Esau. He enjoyed the fresh meat that Esau brought home from his hunting trips. The taste of wild game pleased Isaac's appetite, and this physical pleasure blinded him to spiritual realities. He forgot about the prophecy God had given to Rebekah before the boys were born. He ignored the clear signs that Jacob was the one God had chosen. Isaac's favoritism wasn't based on spiritual wisdom, it was based on his stomach. He loved Esau because Esau fed him well. This showed that Isaac himself was being controlled by physical desires rather than spiritual discernment. He should have remembered that God had chosen the younger son to receive the covenant blessings, but his love of good food clouded his judgment. Rebekah, on the other hand, remembered what God had told her during her difficult pregnancy. She had not forgotten the prophecy that the older would serve the younger. She could see that Jacob had the spiritual sensitivity that Esau lacked. Her favoritism toward Jacob was based on spiritual understanding, not physical pleasure. But even though Rebekah's choice was spiritually correct, the division in the household created terrible tension. The parents were pulling in opposite directions, each supporting a different son. This split in the family set the stage for the conflicts that would follow. The true nature of Esau's heart was revealed in a moment that changed everything. One day, Esau returned from a hunting trip that had gone badly. He had been out in the wilderness for days without success. His stomach was empty, his strength was failing, and his pride was wounded. He came home desperate and angry. As Genesis chapter 25 verse 29 tells us, once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. The smell of Jacob's cooking hit Esau like a physical blow. He had been dreaming of food for days, and now the rich aroma of the red lentil stew filled his nostrils and made his mouth water. His hunger became so intense that he could think of nothing else. All his famous hunting skills had failed him, and now he was reduced to begging his younger brother for food. Genesis chapter 25 verse 30 records Esau's desperate words, "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." The Hebrew text shows that Esau was so desperate he could barely speak properly. He pointed at the food like a starving animal, unable even to ask politely. His hunger had reduced him to a primitive state where nothing mattered except filling his stomach. Jacob saw his opportunity. He had been waiting for this moment, perhaps for years. He knew that Esau despised spiritual things, and now he was about to prove it to everyone. Jacob's response in Genesis chapter 25 verse 31 was simple and direct: "Sell me your birthright now." The birthright was much more than just inheritance rights. It included the spiritual leadership of the family and the responsibility to carry on God's covenant with Abraham. The firstborn son was supposed to be the priest of the family, the one who offered sacrifices and led worship. Most importantly, the birthright included the promise that the Messiah would come through this family line. Any godly man would have been horrified at the suggestion to sell such precious spiritual privileges. The birthright connected the family to God's eternal plan to save the world. It was priceless beyond measure. No amount of food or money could equal its value, but Esau's response revealed the true condition of his heart. Genesis chapter 25, verse 32 records his shocking words, "I am about to die. Of what use is a birthright to me?" Esau wasn't really about to die from hunger. He was exaggerating his situation because his physical comfort mattered more to him than spiritual blessings. He was willing to trade eternal privileges for temporary relief. This single statement revealed everything about Esau's character. He was a man who lived only for the present moment, with no understanding of eternal values. Esau saw no value in the birthright because he saw no value in God's promises. The idea of waiting for God to fulfill his covenant seemed pointless when his stomach was empty right now. He wanted immediate satisfaction, not future blessings. This was the heart of a man who had been hated by God before his birth, a heart that naturally despised spiritual things. Jacob wasn't satisfied with just Esau's verbal agreement. Genesis chapter 25 verse 33 shows his insistence. "Swear to me." Now, Jacob demanded an oath because he knew how important this moment was. This wasn't just a casual trade between brothers. It was the transfer of the covenant promises from one generation to the next. Esau didn't hesitate. The same verse records his response. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. With those words, Esau threw away the most precious thing he possessed. He gave up his right to be the spiritual leader of his family. He surrendered his place in God's plan to bring the Messiah into the world. He traded eternal blessings for a bowl of soup. The meal that followed sealed the transaction. Genesis chapter 25, verse 34, describes the scene. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Esau ate his meal with satisfaction, apparently feeling no regret about what he had just done. He filled his stomach, got up, and walked away as if nothing important had happened. To him, the trade had been worthwhile. He had gotten what he wanted, immediate relief from his hunger. But the verse ends with a devastating judgment. Thus Esau despised his birthright. This wasn't just a bad decision made in a moment of weakness. This was the revelation of Esau's true character. He despised the birthright because he despised God and everything connected to God. His actions proved that God's hatred of him before his birth was perfectly just. God had known exactly what kind of man Esau would be. Years passed after Esau sold his birthright, but the consequences of that decision were not finished. Isaac grew old and his eyesight failed, but he still had not given his final blessing to his sons. Despite the prophecy and despite Esau's obvious spiritual failures, Isaac was determined to bless his older son. Genesis chapter 27 verse 1 describes Isaac's condition. When Isaac was old and his eyes were dim so that he could not see, he called Esau his older son and said to him, "My son." And he answered, "Here I am." Isaac's physical blindness matched his spiritual blindness. He could not see that God had chosen Jacob, not Esau, to receive the covenant blessings. He was about to act against God's revealed will because of his favoritism toward his older son. Isaac's plan was to bless Esau secretly before Rebekah could interfere. In Genesis chapter 27, verses 2 to 4, Isaac reveals his intentions. "Behold, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare for me delicious food such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die." Isaac wanted one final taste of Esau's cooking before giving him the blessing. Even in this most sacred moment, Isaac was motivated by his physical appetite rather than spiritual wisdom. He was putting his love of food above his obedience to God's revealed plan. But God had other plans. Rebekah overheard Isaac's conversation with Esau, and she immediately understood what was at stake. She remembered the prophecy God had given her before the boys were born. She knew that Jacob was supposed to receive the blessing, not Esau. Rebekah called Jacob and explained the situation. In Genesis chapter 27, verses 6 to 10, she laid out her plan. "I heard your father speak to your brother Esau. Bring me game and prepare for me delicious food, that I may eat it and bless you before the Lord, before I die. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 good young goats, so that I may prepare from them delicious food for your father, such as he loves. And you shall bring it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies." Jacob was initially reluctant, not because he thought the plan was wrong, but because he was afraid of getting caught. In Genesis chapter 27, verse 11-12, he expressed his concern. "Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him and bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing." But Rebekah was determined to see God's will accomplished. She took responsibility for any consequences and helped Jacob disguise himself. Genesis chapter 27 verses 15-16 describes her preparations. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau her older son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob her younger son. And she put the skins of the young goats on his hands and on the neck where it was smooth. The disguise was complete. Jacob smelled like Esau, felt like Esau, and was dressed like Esau. When he approached his blind father with the prepared food, Isaac was confused but ultimately convinced. Genesis chapter 27, verses 18-27 records the tense conversation between Isaac and the disguised Jacob. Isaac was suspicious because the voice sounded like Jacob, but when he felt the hairy skin and smelled Esau's clothes, he was convinced that this was his older son. Now, the blessing that Isaac pronounced over Jacob was magnificent. Genesis chapter 27, verses 28-29 contains the words that would shape the future. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. This blessing transferred all the covenant promises to Jacob. He would be the one through whom God would bless the world. He would be the father of the chosen nation. The Messiah would come through his family line, not Esau's. Just as Jacob left his father's presence, Esau returned from his hunting trip. Genesis chapter 27, verses 30-31 describes the timing. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, when Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from his hunting. He also prepared delicious food and brought it to his father. When Esau realized what had happened, his reaction was explosive. Genesis chapter 27, verses 34-36 records his desperate response. As soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, O my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing." Esau said, "Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing." Esau's tears and pleading revealed that he finally understood what he had lost. But it was too late. The blessing had been given, and Isaac could not take it back. In Genesis chapter 27, verse 37, Isaac explained the situation. "I have made him lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to him for servants, and with grain and wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son?" Isaac was able to give Esau only a lesser blessing, one that promised a life of violence and eventual servitude to his brother. Genesis chapter 27, verses 39-40 contains this prophetic word, "Behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck." Esau's response to losing the blessing revealed the true wickedness of his heart. Instead of repenting for his spiritual failures or acknowledging that he had brought this situation on himself, Esau was filled with murderous rage toward his brother. Genesis chapter 27, verse 41 exposes Esau's evil intentions. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him, and Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother, Jacob." This was not just anger or disappointment. This was cold-blooded murder being planned. Esau was willing to wait until after Isaac's death so that he wouldn't upset his father, but he was absolutely determined to kill Jacob. This revealed the violent nature that had been in Esau's heart all along. Esau's plan to commit murder proved that God's hatred of him before his birth was perfectly justified. God had known that Esau would become a man capable of killing his own brother over an inheritance. The violence that would characterize Esau's descendants was already showing itself in their father. The threat was real enough that Jacob had to flee for his life. Rebekah heard about Esau's plan and warned Jacob to escape to her family in Haran. Genesis chapter 27, verse 43 to 44, records her urgent warning. "Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to Laban my brother in Haran, and stay with him a while, until your brother's fury turns away." Jacob would spend the next 20 years in exile because of Esau's murderous intentions. This separation was God's way of protecting Jacob from his brother's violence. It also served as a judgment on Esau, who lost any remaining opportunity to repent and reconcile with his brother. Esau's spiritual rebellion was further revealed through his choice of wives. He deliberately married women who were outside the covenant community, showing his complete disregard for his family's spiritual heritage. Genesis chapter 26, verse 34-35 describes his first marriages. When Esau was 40 years old, he took Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, to be his wife, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and they made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. These marriages were a direct violation of everything Abraham's family stood for. Abraham had made his servant swear not to take a wife for Isaac from among the Canaanites. Isaac and Rebekah had maintained this principle of marrying within the covenant community, but Esau deliberately chose pagan wives who worshipped false gods. The text says that these wives made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. This wasn't just cultural disappointment, it was spiritual grief. Esau's wives brought idolatry and pagan practices into the family. They had no respect for the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Their presence was a constant reminder of Esau's rejection of his spiritual heritage. Later, when Esau realized that his parents were displeased with his choice of wives, he made a superficial attempt to fix the situation. Genesis chapter 28, verse 6-9 describes his inadequate response. Now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Paddan Aram to take a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he directed him, "You must not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan," and that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and gone to Paddan Aram. So when Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please Isaac his father, Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives. He had Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. Esau's third marriage showed that he still didn't understand spiritual things. He married into Ishmael's family, thinking this would please his parents because Ishmael was Abraham's son, but Ishmael had been rejected by God in favor of Isaac. Marrying Ishmael's daughter was not the same as marrying within the covenant line. More importantly, Esau kept his pagan wives alongside his new wife. He didn't divorce the Hittite women who had brought such grief to his parents. This showed that his third marriage was just a political move, not a genuine spiritual change. He was trying to manipulate his parents' feelings without actually repenting of his rebellion. Esau became the father of the Edomite nation, and his descendants inherited his character traits. They became known for their violence, pride, and hatred of God's people. The enmity between Esau and Jacob continued for generations between their descendants. Genesis chapter 36 records Esau's genealogy and his settlement in the land of Seir. This mountainous region became known as Edom, meaning red, after Esau's appearance and the red soil of the area. The Edomites became a powerful nation, but they remained enemies of Israel throughout their history. The prophets later spoke many words of judgment against Edom because of their treatment of Israel. The book of Obadiah is entirely devoted to God's judgment on Edom. Obadiah verse 10 gives the reason for God's anger. Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. The Edomites consistently opposed Israel and celebrated when Jerusalem was destroyed. Psalm 137 verse 7 records their cruel joy at Israel's suffering. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare, down to its foundations. This perpetual enmity was the fulfillment of the prophecy given to Rebekah before the twins were born. The two nations that came from her womb were indeed divided and at war with each other. Esau's descendants inherited his hatred for God's chosen people. The ultimate fate of Edom was complete destruction. The prophet Malachi, in chapter 1, verses 2-4, records God's final word about Esau's legacy. I have loved you, says the Lord. But you say, how have you loved us? Is not Esau Jacob's brother? Declares the Lord. Yet I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. I have laid waste his hill country and left his heritage to jackals of the desert. If Edom says, we are shattered, but we will rebuild the ruins, the Lord of hosts says, they may build, but I will tear down, and they will be called the wicked country, and the people with whom the Lord is angry forever. This prophecy was fulfilled when the Edomite nation was completely destroyed and disappeared from history. Today, there are no Edomites left in the world. God's hatred of Esau extended to his descendants, and they suffered the ultimate judgment of extinction. The story of Esau serves as a permanent warning about the consequences of despising spiritual things. His life demonstrated that God's predestination is always perfectly just. Esau's actions confirmed that God had been right to hate him before his birth. He was a man who naturally despised God and everything connected to God, and his choices proved the righteousness of God's eternal decree. If this story has challenged you or opened your eyes to something new about God's sovereignty, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming biblical stories. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about God's justice and mercy. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful biblical truths to people around the world. Leave a comment below telling us what impacted you most about Esau's story. And remember, God's choices are always perfect, even when they're hard for us to understand.